You're very welcome to the 4 o'clock session today, and we're going to be talking about lead generation for the next hour. We're going to hard stop at 5, and to join us today, delighted to have Aoife McElrath and Philly Hayes join us. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a moment, but just to set the scene, we our group sessions this morning, a lot of discussion about selling and international selling. With the session with Aaron to have a chat through his perspective on prospecting, generating inbound and early stage activities with a view to scaling the business. And in this discussion, we're going to start in the broad theme of lead generation. We've got some content that we'd like to chat through with you. And then we're going to have questions from you folks that we're going to collect and chat as we go along. So anything that you'd like to ask, drop it into the chat stream and we'll aggregate those and put those questions to Aoife and Philly as we go through. Don't be shy about asking anything. Aoife and Philly have told us that they're quite happy to answer questions on anything to do with lead generation. So, or slightly associated in the sales and marketing. So don't be holding back. Time to ask questions and pick the brains of Aoife and Philly today. So with no further ado, can I maybe ask Aoife and Philly to introduce themselves? So Aoife, ladies first.
Thanks, Harry. Hi, everybody. I am Aoife McElrath. I am a freelance global digital marketing consultant. So I have 20 years experience in going global, international markets, and everything digital. And for me, digital just equals sales, right? We do everything online to drive a sale. So really, I help brands get the right content in the right place at the right time to convert.
Thanks, Aoife. Philly?
Yeah, so my name is Philly Hayes, as I said. So I'm the head of business development at LearnUpon. So we're a learning management system, which is kind of similar to what people would use in college, but we solely focus on corporates. So we sell B2B, mainly to the US, done it all predominantly from Ireland. So we've 1,100 customers and growing really steadily and really, really well through a particular set of processes, and hopefully we can go through them today. I think there's going to be so many different products in the room and so many different stages and everything like that. So they're like lead gen it's my main headache every day. So it's not like there'll be a silver bullet, but hopefully there's stuff in here that we've learned from trying and failing that might be helpful for everyone on the call. So I'm looking forward to the questions.
That's great, Philly. Thanks very much for that. And then just to kick us off, if I can ask Aoife first. So, thinking about lead generation and where it fits into the overall mix, and, for companies that have been through their first match funding process, limited resources, promises made to investors, keen to get moving with things, notwithstanding what Aaron said earlier, which was great and great insight and opinion. What are your thoughts and views on how the audience, how folks here today should be thinking about lead generation and how to allocate resources?
Yeah, so I would probably not necessarily agree with everything that Aaron says, just because I think a lot of it's applicable to a much bigger enterprise. When it comes to smaller startups, honestly, one of the challenges I see with working with a lot of early stage startups, and I am a mentor with Enterprise Ireland, so I do this quite a bit, is that they actually haven't figured out R&Rs, right? They haven't figured out the roles and responsibilities and who owns that within the business. So if you haven't figured out who owns the roles and responsibilities across sales, marketing, and operations, then it's really hard to decide how that's going to work. So like from a business perspective, lead gen should be driven by marketing, but executed and managed by sales, right? But if you haven't agreed with who should own which piece of that, especially for prospecting, if you do have sales person, whether it's yourself or an employee working the phones or working a list of prospects that you do have, how does marketing support that person? And then the flip side is, if you've exhausted the sales pipe of the network and you're trying to build a lead gen pipe, what does marketing need to do? And when does it get handed off to sales, which I think Aaron touched a lot upon. But I think one of the first pieces is actually figuring that and who owns that.
Cool. And in terms of the CEO or the founders working that out, how do they go about working that out?
Yeah, so, obviously, and I know it sounds really basic, but again, it's always hard when you're down in the depths of trying to build your business, is taking a step back and actually understanding what is the business strategy, and the strategy, not the tactic, right? So, what is the goal for 2021 from a business perspective and beyond? I want to get 100 new customers, right? Is the business strategy, yes, ultimately we want to land business 100 new customers, but I want brands to be more visible. I want to be seen as an expert in the field, all of these things that will ultimately lead to, landing 100 new customers. So actually understanding what the business strategy is and then mapping that to, okay, if we know what the strategy is, how did we work with marketing, or how does marketing then develop that into tactical execution that will lead into a funnel of sales leads. That's
great. Thanks, Aoife. So Philly, what's your perspective on that then? So money's tight. You also wouldn't know that. Oh, sorry, you would still know that and learn upon. There's no such thing as, a benevolent investment round with no list of demands attached. So whether you're starting up or you've been recently funded or you're going through your scaling funding, how do you think about lead gen? And then for folks in the room who are a bit earlier in development than you guys would be, looking in the rearview mirror, what are the sort of big rocks you think folks should be thinking about?
Well, one thing I think is just the absolute repeatability of the process. So loads of times I'll chat to kind of earlier stage founders, and they'll say as almost a boast that we've been able to get 3 customers and we didn't even market. We didn't even do anything to get them. And that's actually not a good thing, because, well, typically from my perspective anyway, from a SaaS perspective, you're looking at repeatable revenue. And so you need to know what you did in order to get those customers in the first place. And if you got 5 customers or 3 customers or whatever without even marketing, that actually I don't think is something to boast about. It's good for revenue and keep things going for a while. But if you didn't do something proactive to get them, you don't know what you did to get them. And so I would think fundamentally, as Aoife says, understanding what your North Star is, like we do a lot of work internally based around OKRs and objectives and key results. And so mapping out specifically what you want to happen or to be achieved is really important. But fundamentally, and Emer will know this from chatting to Paul, I probably got it from Paul, it's just understanding who your ideal customer persona is. And it doesn't particularly matter how early stage you are, that's still it's absolutely crucial for us at LearnUpon at the minute. And no doubt, Salesforce are still segmenting up their different customers and understanding their specific messaging for each of those segments. So understanding your ICP early on can allow you to probably get your customer base there with people that can get the most value from your products. Hopefully they then in turn become advocates. So they become people you go to for marketing resources, but their network as well is who you also want to market towards. And so you kind of get an understanding of where they play, what they do, and that sort of thing. So I would spend so much time dealing with the first few customers and really, really understanding what the value they got out of it was. And then because it is repeatable to ask a customer you just landed for an introduction to another customer. That is a repeatable process. And that is, if that should be your gateway into a network of people. And it's so easy, but it's overlooked. For a long time, when we sign up a customer, that's the happiest probably they'll ever be with us. We are awesome at customer success and everything like that. But the moment they sign is the moment they have all their ambitions of what they can do with you. And we should be asking right at that point, do you know anyone else who needs an LMS? And it's their most likely point to introduce us and things like that. So I think where budgets are tight, that's what I would do. I would totally nail in on the ideal customer persona. Okay,
that's great, Phil. And then if we move past that, so we've looked at strategy, we've looked at the roles and responsibilities. We've looked at what the company wants to achieve. We've got the ideal customer profile in place. We've done those early first few sales. At some stage, somebody in the board or one of the investors says, "Okay, what are you doing about lead generation?" And it gets very real there. It needs to be actioned. So in terms of looking at those lead generation efforts, Aoife, if I could ask you first. So, how does a company decide where to focus those efforts?
Yeah, I think it will depend. Your marketing mix and how you're going to go out and try and find those customers it depends whether you're B2B or B2C, and then that can determine what the marketing mix is. So if you're more B2C, you're probably going to need to spend a lot more time on social media and try and use social as a channel to start capturing potential sales. Paid is going to be a big thing. Like if you're selling something, and Instagram is going to be where your potential customers are, then you're going to need to have a social strategy and put paid behind that. If you're B2B and you have a longer sales cycle, then you need to think about probably more around content marketing and email and webinars, right? So I think it really depends on which vertical you're in and then which niche you're in. But I think there's always some basics, right? And the first thing is your website, right? I mean, digital and websites have always been there. Obviously, 2021 and now 2022, it is everything, right? It is our brand because we are not face-to-face with anybody. One of the core things I always ask every client, and 7 out of 10 can't actually answer me, is what is the objective of the website? What's the goal of your website, right? Not just to build one, everybody has one, but what is it supposed to do for you, right? Your website is your main lead gen. So make sure you know what the website should do and design it accordingly. And make sure then for lead gen that you have the right pages and the right content created to optimize for those leads. The other two, very easy ones is paid, right? Regardless of where you are, is actually paying for that traffic, especially if you're a new customer or a new business, you're probably going to have to pay for some leads through paid, right? And then the long-term objective is to get your SEO and your organic ranking correct. So I always explain when it comes to sales leads with brands is that you're in a sprint and a marathon, right? Your paid is your sprint. You're going to be fast. You want to know what you're doing and you want them to click, right? You're going to get those customers really, really quickly, but you're going to pay for them every time. The second piece is your SEO, and that's your marathon. It's not going to happen overnight, and you're going to have to spend time and effort and keep going and keep going and keep going. But ultimately, the goal with that as a lead gen is that you rank organically and that you're not going to have to pay for those leads anymore, right? So I think website, understanding what it's supposed to do and optimize the website for your potential targeted customers, have a paid and an SEO strategy in place, and then look at the other marketing mixes that are applicable to you. Email, people always forget about it. It is still the #1 highest converting channel. So make sure you have a good email campaign set up.
That's great. Thanks, Aoife. And Philly, what's your perspective on this in terms of getting action oriented and getting at it?
Yeah, so just from practical side, I think the first thing you need to look at is what your average deal size is, and that's going to determine where you can actually play. Like, I think, I would often chat to early stage people that are going to go to a conference, but their average, like I'm in charge of all of our conferences in Learn Upon. And I know we close 1 in 9 opportunities we get from conferences, while we close 1 in 4 opportunities we get from our website. And so the conversion rate is way lower. The average ticket size has to be higher at a conference. And so getting the budget and just deciding to go exhibit at a big conference may or may not be the right thing. It really depends on what your average deal size is. So for another practical side of it is, I would look at, it's highly unlikely the product you're doing is the only product in the market. And I would look straight to Silicon Valley to find out who's just got 50 million quid and is doing something very similar, and what exactly are they doing. And there's loads of really cheap and easy hacky type tools to go and find out, okay, what pages, give me a listing of every single page on their website. What pages are ranking really well? Oh, that's where I should create my content, on the pages that are ranking the most. So like the playbook has been written, it's about following the most similar person. And that doesn't necessarily mean to be someone that has the same product as you. It's just someone who's attracting the same person that would be your buyer. So it may not be like for like. So I would go there and I would kind of hunt down and know those competitors inside out. And one really handy place to go and start building that picture is a website called G2 Crowd, if anyone isn't aware of it. essentially it's like a listing site. It is kind of trying to become I guess the new Gartner in some ways, or the online Gartner, because it will do a magic quadrant of CRMs and where you lie and all that. No doubt there's brown envelopes involved, as there is in all the rest of them, to get in the top right. But what you can do there is you can pay to get on a listing site, and they can be quite expensive, but they're worth dabbling with. But so if someone is looking for a CRM and they type into Google CRM, G2 Crowd might come up above Salesforce in that instance, because they're able to get that, and you'll pay an awful lot for that click. But even just as a research tool, you're able to go in there and find your segment, find your acronym or industry vertical that you actually do play in, and that's going to give you a really good sense of who else is in the market as well, and then really nailing in as to what they're doing. So there's really quick and easy, cheap tools that will tell you every single piece of social media they're sending out, listings of their websites, as I said, to know what blogs to focus on or anything like that. So I would say most of the time, someone is attracting the person you want to attract to your website already. So you find that, and you you use that as a guiding principle, to put it lightly, as to what you should go at. And they should be almost your North Star. In that instance, that's where I would spend it, because it's like money and time, and so there's a decent bit of time involved in this. But that's where I would spend at least my time, is nailing inside and out. There's the likes of g2crowd.com, Capterra.com, which is CAPTERRA.com, Trust Radius. They're all that same type of website, and they push all their data out publicly, so you can see what's going on rather than having to pay for a Gartner report.
If I could dovetail on that as well, Phil, I completely agree, right? We haven't really even touched on the research piece, right? But when it comes to online as well, because as I said, this year, everything is going to be online. When it comes to looking at competitor research, most people go and look at their direct competitors, right? Who is my direct competitor in my industry that I'm trying to compete against to get that sale across the line? But when you're looking at the digital landscape, you have to look at the whole digital landscape, right, for your topic that you want to potentially generate a lead for. So you're not just competing against your direct competitor, offline competitors. You're directing against every blogger that's talking about that topic, every news channel that's talking about that topic. Anybody that's talking about it is your indirect competitor online. So you need to also understand, in order to generate a lead, actually who am I competing against potentially for that traffic, and get a really good view on that. So another one for brilliant insight at competitive research is SEMrush, which will give you, if anybody wants, I do have an affiliate relationship with them, but I've been working with them for years. I do have a 7-day free trial. If anybody wants one, just ping me after. I can give you a 7-day free trial to it, but it will give you, how are you ranking? What are your competitors? What are they doing? What content are they writing? So, as I said, to kind of back up with Philly's, is you need to do the research to understand what that competitive landscape is like, because you won't, it's not just always a direct competitor.
So as we look at, these activities, and we talk about building the website, doing the research, looking at competitors, looking at collaborators, the similarly afflicted, to look at how we can learn from them. As we start to do all that, the question then comes up, okay, so who's actually going to do all this stuff? Who's going to own it? Do I got to do it as the founder? Do I hire someone? Do I contract someone? Do I find an agency? How do I do all this? We're really interested in your thoughts, and particularly your experiences you've seen of the good, the bad, and the ugly of how people have tried to resource this. Aoife, do you want maybe?
Yeah, sure. So, look, I've seen it done both ways, right? I'm a big advocate to buy versus build when you're starting, right? Because depending where you are in finances and where you're investing your money for the business, when it comes to things like digital marketing and generating leads, it's sometimes easier to buy it than build it. And I'm an advocate with, if you buy it, you can test, excuse my French, the shit out of it with experts, right? Let them help you test it. And when you know you've built something, that they've been able to build something that's working for you with your input, right? It's not, you can't just outsource it and hope they're going to do it well. You have to be really, really engaged with buying it in. But if you buy it in and you can figure out what's working, then I think there's a really good place to start thinking about, how do I now build it? How do I now hire in to take what that agency has done and do it better? Or can I leave some of it with an agency and bring somebody in to do better pieces of this? That depends, right? If your entire business is going to be based on really, really short lead times and really small volume, or like small value, and you need high volume, maybe then you need to hire because you need to hit the ground running. But if you have a longer sales cycle, I am an advocate of outsourcing, especially the marketing, if that's not your niche, if it's not your expertise, if you're technical and you're operational and you don't understand marketing, I think buying it in is a good place to start before you build it, because adding a full-time employee to payroll is a headache. We all know that. It's more than just buying in and putting somebody on payroll. There's people management and everything else that goes with that. So
Aoife, could I just ask a kind of a supplementary question on that? Sorry for interrupting. Are you, when you're talking about outsourcing, are you thinking like, you know, the famous one that always makes my blood run cold when someone says we need to redesign the website, and you feel a big web project coming on that's going to take like 12 months. Can you just make it a bit more concrete? If I'm sitting here, I've got my product built, I've got a couple of early customers, I now need to start generating what Aaron talked about earlier on in terms of the customers that I don't have relationships with, the ones where the trust factor is low. These are people I don't know and they don't know me.
Right.
And I don't have the skill set. Like my fear is I'm listening to you talking and I'm going, oh, I feel 100 grand disappearing down a black hole.
No, not at all. Actually, I had somebody in the breakout focus group earlier, you know, who had a budget, I think, of like 2,000 a month, and he was outsourcing marketing. So for like that type of budget, you should be looking for an agency to be able to design you a marketing campaign based on the products and solutions that you want to sell. Design that campaign to ultimately generate leads. They should be the one telling you how many leads they think they should be able to bring you in the time frame that they can bring them to you. They should tell you and have the expertise to tell you what the best marketing mix is for your business, right? Okay, so Emer, we think we should have a campaign for an email campaign. We should have a paid campaign, and we'll build a landing page for this. And then we're going to give you a follow-up content as well. And maybe we'll do a LinkedIn post for you. We're going to write a blog for you to post as LinkedIn. So that's what I mean by outsourcing digital. This is not, I need to redesign my website, right? That's completely something else. This is how tactically can I develop a digital marketing strategy to generate leads.
Okay.
And if you don't have that expertise, go to an agency that can tell you what that should be. But obviously, it's a budget, right? Don't go to a really, really big agency that's not going to touch you because your budget's 500 to 2,000. Go to a smaller local agency that's going to appreciate your business.
Okay.
Does that qualify a bit better?
Yeah, definitely helpful.
So Philly, what's your perspective then?
Yeah, so I think you again, average ticket price, as Aoife was saying, if it's high volume or high ticket price, you're going to determine whether you need the competency in-house or not. But I think from my experience, the agencies have moved to a new, I'm not sure, but I guess a lot of people in the room might be SaaS businesses here, but the agencies have also moved to that. So there's really clever ways that you can ramp up with agencies now with specific subscription-based plans. So like you still need to have a plan of what you want to do, but if you're able to piece together the different elements, you can do things like no longer need to try and have awful designs, because you can go to a website like Design Pickle, and for €9 a month, you get a certain amount of their time every month. And that's a SaaS business that they've built around what used to be a professional service. And the same thing does apply. There are similar for content and things like that. But I think for me, the founder or the person who has the vision anyway would need to be inherently involved in that, because you would still need to be honing in on that ideal customer persona or profile, and then really doubling down on your customer advocates, like I was mentioning. I think the one tip I would have would be, you'd often hear, we're going to hire an SDR and that's the plan. And like, we're just going to hire business development rep or sales development rep and give, like, for want of a better, give them a phone. And it just never ends well. It just, like, I wouldn't have said it ever ends well. We're still figuring out the whole outbound perspective and dialing and getting all of that right, because through your digital channels, people are inundated now, and now you can't even get through on phones. You're getting to other parts of the, unless you've got home phone numbers, which really no one should have. So I think that would be one thing I would look to avoid anyway, just trying to get an SDR and putting them in there, or a business development rep, sales development rep in there without guidance. I would be more inclined to wait until you were able to hire someone who had some degree of a playbook for it. So if you were able to get sales to X level, and that meant you were able to hire a manager rather than a college grad, knowing what I know now about what it takes to do outbound and what it doesn't take, what I probably know a lot more about than a few years ago when I thought we could have a stab at it myself by getting myself plus a BDR, and it absolutely did not work in that perspective. And so we had to kind of come back to seeing, okay, there's a playbook out there. None of us are doing something that hasn't been done before. Let's see if we can get someone that's 2 or 3 years down the journey that might want to own this segment of the business. So I would wait and try to hire that bit of experience where I can. And otherwise I would look at some of those innovative agencies that are built on a SaaS model too.
Okay. And Philly, if you guys were building Learnupon all over again, knowing what you know now,
yeah,
what would your first lead gen hire look like? Would it be a hire? Would it be a contractor?
So
what would it look like?
With Learnupon, it was actually hires. And so that was, I guess, down to the vision the guys had in there, and it's credited all to them rather than anything I was involved with. But it would have been hires. Yeah, for sure. We hired to get the right people in the door, and hired very strictly, and made sure we knew what we kind of expected out of people within 6 months, to make sure we were keeping the best as well and all that. But it was a hire. Now, what we did, that if I looked at, say, the LMS landscape now, that you couldn't do now without venture capital, is at the time, those listing websites I mentioned to you made a lot of economic sense. So Capterra was a big one for us. And so we were buying, the third place on that listing. People were clicking through. We were able to get those in as demos, and we closed about 1 in 4 demos. And we knew at that point was 1 in 4 demos at about 60 days, and we knew our average deal size. So we kind of knew what it took. But the prices of those listings now, you could not do at the budgets we had then. So whether that's specific to just LMSs, I don't know, but those websites are now, you're talking about, in some cases, $50 for a click. And there could be 10 clicks that get you to a website, and then there could be another 10 of those that don't even touch a call to action button. So what we did at the time was, while that was our source, we were building out the organic model and building out all the content. So really kind of, it allowed us to build out the content motion. And then eventually our price per demo, which would have been a very important statistic to us, was kept economical. Even as we saw diminishing returns from the listing sites, it was kept economical because of the free demos we were bringing in through content organically as well. So yeah, so it was a hire on our side anyway, Harry. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I've one last question for both of you before we hand over to the floor. So folks, if you have questions, if you could just drop them into the chat function, we'll just try and aggregate them and then ask them through to Aoife and Philly. But just while you're doing that, I'd like to ask the sort of COVID question. God forbid somebody has to. So for Aoife and Philly, just in the world of what COVID is going to do to us this year, how does that impact your thinking around the generic advice around lead gen and what folks should do? For either of you that wants to take it.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Aoife, or I'll
go? You go first this time.
Yeah. So, well, I fundamentally think from an outbound perspective that the whole thing, how you go and target people, changes every 6 weeks anyway, because something new comes around, or there's a new email template, or there's voice notes on LinkedIn and all that stuff. So from our perspective, we have stuck really strong with the channels that we're able to produce, which were those kind of more traditional inbound channels. We're doing a very large play on actually sessions kind of like this with learning and development leaders. We call it Learning Impact. Essentially what it is, where we've gone out and got a high note speaker to talk to us, and with surprising results, sometimes with $0 budget, we've been able to get people. And so we then use that as something that's really good for our customers. They come along to that, and then it's a way of generating net new leads. And we market to the database that we've built up over the years, these events, and then that might be the trigger that pushes an SDR to get involved. So what we did to replace both expositions and what we were going to do our own conference was this Learning Impact series. And it's essentially, I just interview someone from our kind of ideal customer persona, and none of them are actually our customers. Some of them are huge logos, and there's a massive brand association that people like, if you joined our McDonald's one, you might think McDonald's use us, and they don't, but we got a really good session out of it, and we stay agnostic in that. And that's been the main thing we did in COVID, that we weren't doing before, was that we went to a digital series like this, and we use that content to be evergreen as well. So we make it available on demand, and we break it into small chunks to share on social media as well. So micro videos and stuff like that. And we were very lucky with our speakers, but for example, we managed to get through to NASA, the chief learning officer at NASA, to do a talk. I was
just going to say that she was great.
Yeah, that's it, Karen. And so I was unbelievably nervous to be chatting to Karen. I was way in over my head. But she was actually, she was someone that they can't take a fee as part of NASA. They weren't able to take. So if we wanted to now, what we wanted to do is donate something to charity for her time and everything like that. But she would have done it for free, because she wanted to get her own voice out there that bit more. And if we wanted to, that could have been a $0 activity we did. It got, say, 680 or so registrations. And then we started marketing towards those, and so got those into the pipeline.
It's great. It's a great example of how to take use of or make use of the COVID situation. Aoife, thoughts from you in terms of how COVID's going to impact things?
Yeah, I think we all agree, nothing is going to change in 2021 versus what we had in 2020, which was just took every rule book we had and threw it out the window, right? More of what we saw last year, the freemium model, people, I saw so much amazing free stuff being given away, right? Like the amount of content that people were charging $1,500 for digital, like training courses that were online and digital, all of a sudden became free last year. People were just like, no, they need help. If you're not in digital, we need help. So I saw friends give away 10,000 euros worth of training for free. They just uploaded it onto the internet and said, here you go, have it, right? So I think brand for next year, right? If you do nothing else, make sure you're doing everything around brand, because we can't be face to face. It's brand that's going to resonate. I think a lot of freemium stuff is going to be more prevalent, because people are, it's not that they're expecting stuff for free, but it's nice when you get something for free. I think conferences we're not going to have in market conferences. I think we're going to see some really cool new conferences come online this year. It was a bit haphazard last year, with people kind of going, crap, my conference was in September and now I can't create something really cool digitally. So I think absolutely we're going to see some really cool new platforms and ways of interacting. But I think 2021 is still going to be everything digital, right? So and the other thing I think to keep in mind is we've all been trained for so long, especially if you've been in digital marketing at all, that this is king. Mobile first. We're actually reversing that this year to be desktop first, right? Because people are on their desktops. They're not looking at social media on their phone for the most part. They're actually on their desktop with big screens. So, I think taking advantage of that, knowing that you could create a bit more engaging content and more interactive content, because it'll be on desktop from a marketing perspective, could get quite interesting.
Okay, that's really cool. That's interesting that mobile first is Sort of getting hit the pause button.
Well, Google's pushing out mobile only indexing come March, you know, so they're doing their own thing, but the rest of us, data showing it's actually desktop that is, I mean, I don't know, Fiddy, what your data is showing, but desktop is driving way more traffic than it was ever before.
It's really cool.
I don't have the specifics, Aoife, on it for sure, but I can, it makes sense. You know, people are sitting at their screens, they're not commuting. So that would make sense, but I wouldn't have the data on it yet.
All right, just to open it up then to the floor. So first question we have is from Michael Fury and Ronspot. So Michael, do you want to maybe ask your question on the website call to action?
Yeah, and it's just a general question about that landing page on your website and, you know, the quality of it. And I know you're designing your website page for maybe two audiences, for Google to get found, and then for your for your human reader to read it, and and the call to action for that then, and what's the best way to design that call to action so that you get those conversions that you're looking for, you know?
Okay.
Thanks.
Just very quickly, I'm going to jump in because SEO is my expertise. Never ever write a landing page for a search engine. The algorithm's too advanced now. Always write it for your prospect that you're pitching to. If you do that correctly, Google will index it, right? So always write for a user, right? The other thing to keep in mind when you're writing a really good landing page is the readability score. On average, you should write content for a 14-year-old to understand. And that's really, really hard sometimes when you know your business so well that you're in the depths of the business and you need to take a step back and go, I need to not write this as an expert. Some of those landing pages I need to write so a 14-year-old can understand what I'm selling here, right? So if you're B2B, don't get really technical about it. That's further down the sales cycle. So always write for user, make it understandable. And the call to action is depending on what you want them to do, right? From a lead gen perspective, is it sign up for the newsletter? Is it get them to sign up for the webinar? Is it the freemium product or the white paper that you're getting them to do? It really depends on what that call to action is. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as that. Sign up for our webinar, register here. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I suppose I've always been taught or understood anyway, and I'm not a marketeer, Aoife, now, that's not my background, is that, to get found on Google in the first place, you need to have content on the page. You hear about these 300 words minimum and per page and per blog or whatever it is content you're writing. Of course, it should be readable by people and should make sense. But first of all, it has got to get found, and therefore that content has to be there to get found.
Absolutely, right? I mean, the content has to be indexable, and that kind of goes back to what we were speaking about earlier about research, right? So for a really well optimized website, you have to do keyword research or search intent, right? Yeah. Understand how your potential customers would search for your product. And again, that means getting out of your own way, because we talk about our businesses the way we think about them, but not necessarily the way somebody would actually look for it. For our products and services. So you need to do that search intent research and then optimize the page according to best practice for the search engine, right? And again, there has to be words on the page. You'd be amazed how many websites I see. And they go, oh, it's not indexable, help me. I'm like, everything is a picture and all the text is in the picture and there's literally no words. So yeah, make sure there's text on the page, but don't worry about word counts, right? I mean, yes, you kind of need a minimum of 300 and it could go up to 2000, but if it's a landing page for sign up for a webinar, you don't necessarily need 300 words to recap of the campaign and a sign up button. That's indexable.
What I would say as well, then, if you're thinking about the person who does land on that, is just thinking about what you show them above the fold. Don't be expecting people to scroll. But I would just have like just as our example, so we used to offer a free trial and we used to offer a demo. So sign up for a demo, sign up for a free trial. And now we will give a trial after a demo only, because 33% we were able to convert 33% of leads that signed up for a trial into a demo, and we were able to convert 46% of people who signed up for a demo into a demo. So we still weren't, it's about half, and that was purposeful. We'd qualify out as many as we'd qualify in, because a demo takes an hour. But basically our demo, we realized, was what closed the deals. We learn upon, at the time, you needed a demo to close the deals. So 1 in 4 of those demos closed. While if we sent someone off to do the free trial, they weren't going to close. And that call to action to get the free trial was a distraction on our page. And we ended up with what we thought was the longest call to action in SaaS, which was get your free trial and demo. And it was just, we had that kind of in a few places. And that was just to make sure that it was always demo first. There's no problem at all giving a trial, but it was always demo first. And then just the other thing is just writing for the particular personas. So just if you do have someone coming, if you, like sometimes some products will have a kind of business buyer and a technical buyer, for example, and just potentially you might be looking at writing for one versus the other and having particular pages for that. Technical buyers don't necessarily want to talk to a salesperson. They want to look at documentation, maybe look at a forum of what other people have done, while a business buyer probably will want to chat to people and maybe will want to chat to the instant messenger on the website. But yeah, again, Michael, I wouldn't know your business, but yeah, that's just the things I point out anyway.
Yeah, very good.
And the other thing I'd say is A/B test. Test them. Never assume what you're going to do is right. Like test the text on the button. Leave it there for 2 days, change it out, put something else in, and just see which works best. Always test it.
On the question of testing, there was a question there from Gavin about A/B testing on desktop versus mobile landing pages. Gavin, is that something you're rolling out at the minute, or is it something you're thinking about?
Well, no, it's just on the basis that you're saying that you can now do desktop, but you can create more rich engagement content-wise, maybe with desktop. Have you actually done any testing yourself where you automatically show a different landing page to desktop, to mobile, and see how they respond, or?
No, generally, like the rule that has been in place for the last 7 years is that you design for mobile first and mobile only, basically, right? Because if it doesn't, from a search engine perspective, if you can't see it correctly on a mobile, Google specifically will just downgrade you, right? They don't really care what happens on the desktop. It is getting a bit more confusing now because come March, now they're kind of talking about, it'll be April, May before there's a global rollout, but Google actually confirmed for the first time ever that they are splitting the index and they're going to have a mobile index and a desktop index, but they don't care about the desktop index. But I just think, like, regardless of all of that, if you could create really engaging content, knowing that your customer, and look at your Google Analytics, right? Don't never take what anybody says for granted. Go look at the Google Analytics. It's very clear what the breakdown of desktop to where your devices are and what platforms they're on. And go look at the traffic and see what happened in the last 12 months, right? And if you are seeing big, genuine uplift in desktop traffic, think about creating something really amazing for your desktop user, right? That wouldn't work necessarily on mobile because you know that they're going to be there.
So if I could ask sort of a follow-on question on the content, John, if I could sort of lift up your question, there's a question here about how to get good/cheap or cheap/good content written or produced. Just be interested on your thoughts there in terms of how you produce content. I know, Philly, you've drank the Kool-Aid and you're in video and everything now. You're multimedia and a whole load of it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's one major content side. But the thing that's becoming very easy is using that as like a multiplier. So one piece of content being turned into, like, so if you did do a video, there's tools out there, there's services out there that allow you to turn that video then into an ebook, into a blog post, into your social snippets. And so you could do your hours work or whatever it takes to line up your speaker and then your hours video. And that could be a multiplier. There's a startup in Dublin that are doing work on that called Tribe Tactics. And they will take a video and they'll produce it into multiple formats for you. So it's a really handy one from that perspective. And like, I think it's kind of converse, like in terms of cheap and good and cheap are very difficult to try and get, but you kind of like, there is places you can go online to find lower value writers and stuff like that. But whether you're going to be able to do that consistently is is tricky, to get consistently well written, that you won't end up just going in and rewriting it yourself. Like that would be the worst thing, that you've paid someone and you're like, that actually doesn't make sense. That doesn't encapsulate what our product does or whatever. And you'll end up rewriting it again from that perspective. So
You spend more time editing.
Yeah.
What was sent over would have been cheaper. Yeah.
And to link that to the question there from Justin around podcasts, where do you see podcasts fitting into the content mix for lead gen?
Just from our perspective, I'll speak to Learning Impact. We don't have it as a podcast. We could actually put it in as a podcast, but we don't make anything available without a sign-in. So we want the people to sign up, and we need them to join our database. So if you sign up for one of our, what is in my side is like glorified webinar, I'm calling them episodes and whatnot, but we could definitely make it into a podcast without any issues. But we need it to be behind a form, Phil, that goes to our database. And that's why we don't make it available as a podcast. But there's no doubt that someone could stand up here and say the complete opposite is true from a brand recognition point of view anyway, and getting it out into Spotify and Google Podcasts, whatever it might be, is a good idea. But from our point of view, our generation is net new names into our database. So we have to have a form in front of it.
Okay. Justin,
I think,
sorry, if you go ahead.
Sorry, I just think like podcasting, like it's such a hot topic at the moment, right? And especially now, if anybody has joined Clubhouse and gone into that, like depth of hole, which is the absolutely new trending social media app. It's really easy to do a YouTube video and convert it to a podcast. Like that's what most people are doing right now. The other thing is, it's like, do you have the time and the effort? Because once you start a new channel, you got to keep going. So like, it's not just like, oh, and you could test them, but honestly, I think if you haven't done YouTube and created a video channel, don't jump into podcasting yet, right? Get the video, get the YouTube. That's much more indexable and sales lead generated than a podcast that's quite niche that you're really going to struggle to get an audience in front of straight away. Like as a marketing mix, I wouldn't be jumping into podcasting unless you're quite experienced and have a robust marketing mix in place.
So now that we've heard the expert opinion on it, Justin, do you want to tell us what you're doing on podcasting?
Yeah, sure. Like it's my plan, at least, and this is a high level plan, is not, I suppose, the traditional idea of a podcast and trying to generate content and get people interested in my podcast. The reality is I couldn't care less if 10 people listen to the actual podcast. My plan is to reach out to our potential customers and our potential users, really because this tactic worked on me. A new accounting firm reached out to me and wanted to interview me as a startup about my fundraising. And ultimately it was a sales call from their perspective. We did an interview, did a little podcast, and I ended up giving them a load of business. And I was like, why am I not using this with airlines? Call up operations, so we're airline communication system. Call up our potential users, our like maybe COO, maybe operations controller, flight operations guys, interview them about their experience and stuff, but ultimately just introduce them to our software and our product and what we do. Is that a tactic that's used?
That's exactly, it's very similar to what we're doing with Learning Impact for sure. I think it's the genesis of the idea is that you would actually interview your prospects, seed it with a few customers and interview your prospects. What we've done instead is try to keep it a bit more software agnostic, and we don't talk about software in general, and we use it as a lead gen tool outside of the particular speaker and the brand association. But absolutely, Justin, that is the genesis of the idea, was that you could just start interviewing prospects to start a conversation. And like you're looking at people where it's beneficial for them to give them a stage. They kind of want, their egos tapped on the back as well, and they want their thing to share on LinkedIn and all that stuff too. So you're tapping into that too.
I think it's just the actual tool of the podcast. We've looked into this a bit, both for ourselves and for a couple of clients, and doing the likes of what Philly is doing with Learning Impact is the bar is much lower. Like if you listen to well-produced podcasts that have big audiences, like their production quality, their consistency, it's every Tuesday at 10 o'clock, the next one drops. It's expensive to do. And once you start, you kind of can't stop. Whereas it's much easier to do a series of 5 Learning Impacts and then leverage your marketing content off that for a couple of months, and then do another 5 it just doesn't have the same. Podcast kind of has a rhythm to it that if you're
Once you
not
start, you gotta
adhering to
keep
the
going.
rhythm, you lose your audience really quickly.
Okay, cool.
The other thing, Justin, I'd say is get on Clubhouse. If you haven't, get on that and have a look, because that might work for you quite well as well.
Okay, I'll check that out. Thanks.
So Martin, you had a question about subscription plans. Maybe if you could ask that of Aoife and Philly.
Yeah, no, look, we've been exploring things like Design Pickle and other things just to almost try and manage cost and whatnot. I was just wondering, is there anything else? I'm actually scribbling down lots of lots of things here in terms of things like that that can help you go far, but at maybe a smaller cost than maybe.
It's a sliding scale where you start smaller. Yeah, well, I'm a complete as a service geek anyway, so I've got a few of them anyway if it's helpful. But there's like the initial research as a service. So like just getting a subscription to get a certain amount of research done every month. That's called askwonder.com. So there's Design Pickle for design, but then they won't do your HTML and stuff like that. So there's a company called HTML Burger. They do that again as a service for HTML. A place I go for inspiration from the design perspective is a website called Dribbble with 3 B's. And that's kind of where designers put up their work to try and showcase what, to get hired, but it's a really good place to go for inspiration of what you'd like to be done. So like feeding that into a Design Pickle then is really handy. And I mentioned then looking at competitors too, really low cost tool called competitors.app. Lets you kind of look at what competitors are doing. From a lead gen perspective, there's 2 tools that I'd look at from like ZoomInfo would have been the tool that was there all the time, but it's very expensive and I find the data to be out of date. So there's lots of ones that sit on top of LinkedIn. One of them is Lusha, which is Lusha. And another one is Cognism, which kind of sits on top of Salesforce. And both of those will kind of allow you to go to a LinkedIn profile and hopefully get an email and a phone number from it as well, if it's there.
So if I'm just conscious of our time rolling here. So question on email marketing, and it's probably multifaceted. So first off, email, for your point earlier that it's still working. Are we all not getting swamped? Be interested in both your comments on that. And then within that, we've talked about a number of different mediums, any other general guidance on hacking these processes? What could we do to make things go faster or better? But start with email first. Aoife?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Email is still the #1 highest converting marketing channel if it's done correctly, right? When it comes to lead generation, make sure that you have a series of emails that map to where the customer or potential lead is in the sales process that you want to use. And make sure that you have a tracking platform that you're using the email from, like HubSpot. The free version of HubSpot is brilliant, right? But make sure that you're managing your emails through something so you can know when they're opened, you can know when they're actioned, and you could, automate the next email if necessary through it. Absolutely, the subject line is critical, right? Like we all get inundated, our inboxes explode, right? And we do subscribe to emails, but if the email's not valuable to me, I will unsubscribe. So make sure the content is valuable. A/B test your subject lines all the time, right? Make sure you catch them at the very beginning of the email with something hard hitting and valuable to them. And as I said, make sure that you have a series of emails that go out, whether that's sales leads, mapped email process, or whether it's your monthly email newsletter or your weekly email newsletter or whatever it is. But the worst thing you could do is spam somebody's inbox. And especially with GDPR now, right? You have to be really, really careful about what you do there, especially if you are in Ireland going outside. I always say the best rule when you go global is stick to GDPR, regardless of what market you're going to go into.
Okay. And Philly, from your perspective, where does email marketing sit in the
I think Definitely worth noting that there is a difference between the marketing team sending out emails and your sales reps emailing people. I think it's worth noting that they are different and one should trigger the other, that probably correspondences should start with the marketing team going out. And so like your ideal scenario here is potentially that, so on your website, the main place you want to draw people is to your main call to action, which for example could be a demo. But if there is other stuff you've produced, like an ebook or any of these other items that might trigger a download, that's then your secondary market. So I would say if someone signs up for a demo, everyone should be on the phone immediately and like really trying to get that. Like we try to call within a minute, and there's like we time it within a minute, and if it's 5 minutes instead of the first minute, we're 20% less likely to actually get in touch with them ever if they put in a phone request. So honestly, you see people run into the phone to call people. But if that happens, but on the other side, if someone downloads an ebook, there's no point in calling them straight away. So they should typically be getting in what you'd want, something built out in HubSpot, that they're typically getting an email that may be a newsletter, or it may be a cadence of emails that is kind of somewhat related to the ebook that they may have interacted with. And it doesn't have to be too specific, but the way you would try to get it is that there is like a top of funnel email campaign, a middle of funnel, and a bottom of funnel, but just the top of funnel being like very generic catch-all type content, and it gets more specific and more close to your product, like case studies, as you move down the funnel. So like HubSpot or Marketo or any of those tools will give you a scoring mechanism for leads. So it'll tell you kind of when the best time is now for our SDRs or BDRs to jump in and start emailing themselves and calling themselves. So it's kind of worth pointing out that there are two different types of emails, from reps or from your marketing team.
And in terms of the actual tools themselves, Philly and Aoife, it's questions in from Carl. So what tools, good, better, best, ugly, popular, stay away?
What's your budget?
Carl, what's your budget?
What's your budget? You know what I mean? It's really going to come down to that.
Well, we try, where possible, we try to use open source solutions. So like you could use something like ActiveCampaign, or there's PHP ones, or we have, at the moment we're using a HubSpot starter company. Like when you're with Enterprise Ireland, you get like the first year at a good price. So we have all the sales tools for that, but I'm damned if I know how to use them. So it's just, I'm wondering what are the actual tools people use.
HubSpot is very good anyway, I would say. For the most part, we use Salesforce and Marketo, but it is like very complicated. It's very expensive. It's very complicated. And there's numerous people managing just those facets. And like, we have a thing called the spaghetti junction of if this, then that, or if this, and like of what's happening. So HubSpot, for the most part, I would say, is your marketing automation tool, and maybe it makes sense to have your sales work off that then as well. Other sales tools might be Outreach.io, I think, or .com, I'm not sure, and Salesloft.com is another one that people will use, and that's the difference between, say, a marketing email and a sales email. But HubSpot probably has those occasions.
I think HubSpot's your main man, because it's going to do your marketing and your sales at this level, right? Like Salesforce, I've worked with it for years. It's an absolute nightmare. It's so complicated. Yeah. HubSpot, I think, is great because you could grow with it, or it grows with you. You could just add more features and functions as you need them. But if you're on a WordPress or whatever, and there's a million plugins that go into HubSpot as well. So go to HubSpot and look at their plugins and their partnerships, because you could probably get everything you need in one place.
Cool. And a question from Paul. Paul, you had a question there about the company story?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Just a really quick one to you both. I know all your content, Aoife and Philly, is fantastic. For the founders particularly, there's always a good backstory. And I just was interested in founder backstories being used creatively in marketing to get the message out via new channels, rather than trying to copy someone else's, to try and do something with the founder story as part of the brand to get it out into new channels.
So we use our founder story a lot. So like the Silicon Valley Garage is the Irish version for us, is the kitchen table. So that LearnerPon was kind of built around the kitchen table, and that our founders did kind of 12-hour shifts when we landed our first Australian customer, and that's everywhere. So that's in our sales pitches, that's in our messaging, that's our last 5 minutes of our demonstrations, is talking about where it came from, what they wanted to do, why they were doing it. And it is our why. Simon Sinek does a really good 5-minute video on understanding your your why. And I highly recommend, if anyone hasn't seen it, the Simon Sinek video. It's excellent. But that is our why, and we put it out everywhere. For the channels we've done for say Learning Impact as an example, we try to stay agnostic, so we actually don't mention Learn Upon that much in that one, but that's a particular strategy. We're trying to just talk about L&D as in general, like give to the community, and eventually we'll use them as leads to take from the community, but starting by giving. But other than that, our founder story is everywhere.
Aoife, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree. As a startup, I think it's a really powerful piece to work with. But the other thing is you need to be very careful that story doesn't outshine brand. And ultimately, you're building a brand, and you need to be able to get the founder's name away because you want to build a brand. Right? They're always associated with it, but if they want to exit, you want to sell a brand, not the founder's name. So I think there's a timeline associated with that. But I think if the story is really good, yes, absolutely leverage it, but realize that there should be a timeline associated with that story.
Cool.
Harry, I just want to jump in. I unfortunately have to drop off and run off to another meeting very quickly, but thanks. It was lovely to meet everyone, and hopefully we can connect on LinkedIn, anyone who's on today. Philly Hayes anyway, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. So
thanks a million, Philly.
Thanks, Philly. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
So folks, we're going to move to close now.
Thank you, Aoife and Philly in his absence for a really informative hour. It was really good.
Oh, more than welcome. Thanks, guys, and do connect. And if you have further questions, just shoot them at me via LinkedIn or via email.